breeding Pokemon has always seemed incredibly strange to me. Skitty somehow not being turned into a pancake by a wailord and still producing an egg. Ghosts like phantump being born from eggs despite their pokedex entries. Nidorina and Nidoqueen not even being able to have eggs. The strange phenomena of Pokemon Incense, the relation between Manaphy and Phione, how Pokemon egg groups are formed. Psyduck and Wooper having a paldean Wooper child, and so many other strange occurrences. As such, I decided to reach out to the master of Pokemon breeding himself, the OG simp, running in from Pewter City, the rock-solid Pokemon trainer, Brock! And now, thanks to him, I can bring to you the science and mechanics of Pokemon breeding. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and we're gonna break this down in a number of different ways because Pokemon breeding can get really odd, really specific, and really mechanically intricate. We'll simply start big with the Pokemon egg groups and then slowly work our way down, going through how breeding even works, and even further to all of our special cases, like how can a Psyduck and a Wooper produce a paldean Wooper, and explaining the real relation between Manaphy and Phione, amongst many other examples, such as I stated in the intro. To begin, what are Pokemon egg groups? As stated directly from Bulbapedia, egg groups are based on biological traits of Pokemon species, generally allowing biologically similar species to breed. However, there are some oddities, to say the least, within these egg groups, such as the field egg group, which contains a very wide variety of Pokemon species so that seemingly illogical pairings can be found, such as the noted Skitty and wailord situation. Egg groups are generally preserved along evolutionary lines, meaning as a Pokemon evolves, it'll stay in the same egg group, but baby Pokemon, Nidorina, Nidoqueen, and Shedinja, are not in the same group as their evolutionary relatives. Baby Pokemon, Nidorina and Nidoqueen, are in the no eggs discovered group, and thus are unable to breed, while Shedinja is in the mineral egg group, although it requires a Ditto to breed due to it also being a gender unknown Pokemon, and don't worry, we're going to explain all of those as part of our special cases sections as we move along. It's very important to understand that if two Pokemon share an egg group, they can produce an egg together. The difference, though, is how likely this is to occur, and this is called egg compatibility. We'll talk about that after we go through all of our egg groups, as I want you to understand or have a good foundation for what we're talking about through the examples of Pokemon within them. Plus, if I went through every single Pokemon in every single egg group, we would be here forever. So let's begin with the Monster Egg group, which is built up of 81 Pokemon, making up 7.9% of the entire Pokedex. Many of them tend to be bipedal, walking on two legs, while there are some that are waltzing around on four legs as well. A good chunk of them have a long tail, which can help with balance, but at the same time, there are Pokemon such as Nidoking, who will use that tail as a weapon to sweep or crush their enemies and prey. Many will have claws, are partially reptilian, and have some sort of dinosaur inspiration behind them, with some mammals also being here. For example, Cubone, Marowak, and Kangaskhan are all Pokemon that are only in this egg group, which fits all of the details that we just described. Straying away from the seemingly reptile appearance, there's the mountain that is Tyranitar's line and Aggron's line, but then we also get the literal dinosaurs of Shieldon and Amora. What starts to make this interesting is that when we start to break into the Pokemon that are within multiple egg groups, we start getting some really special stuff going on, such as all of our original Kanto starters. All three of them having some level of reptilian inspiration as part of them, but then splitting into Grass for Bulbasaur, Dragon for Charmander, and Squirtle having the Water 1 egg group. Seems pretty easy now that we've identified why they belong in these groups, right? Seeing these physical characteristics matching the egg groups that they belong in. But then we still have some very strange outliers that I will always point out, such as the Mareep line, who are just sheep, who are in this egg group, and at least with Snorlax, it is an impossibly large creature that many people question if it's a bear or some weird koala or otherwise, but Mareep? Why is Mareep in this group? Well, it's because its skin is not normal flesh like yours, mine, or most other animals, or mammals rather, sorry, to my understanding, because Mareep's line is described to have rubbery skin. This allows them to generate and control electricity without getting shocked. Thus, we have an abnormal monster that I love, and it also belongs within the field egg group, which we will, of course, discuss later as to what can be typically found there. Moving forward, we do get some creatures that are pretty clearly monsters, such as the Whismur line, though they also belong to the field egg group. This is likely because, at least as Whismur, it has a very rabbit-like, quality to their ears, and it is very nimble, thus making it more of a mammal, which I guess is a small teaser to the field egg group. Abomasnow is also here too, simply because it is the abominable snowman. It also holds the grass egg group with it, and originally Bergmite's line was only in the monster egg group until it was eventually added to the mineral egg group within Generation 8. I would say the only other interesting outlier here that doesn't seem incredibly obvious right off the bat, based on our common similarities, is Drampa. Now, there are a couple of other dragons here that are reptilian, but Drampa isn't really a reptile or a mammal, nor is it as rough looking as our other dragons like Garchomp and Haxorus, who are sharing the monster and dragon egg groups with Drampa. The only explanation I can think of is that Drampa is more than just a Chinese dragon. It is likely based on the Zulong, which was a mythological creature who had the face of an old man and the body of a dragon. And I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty monstrous to me. Now, as a fun little conclusion to this little section, it turns out that the Pokemaniacs specialize in this egg group, which feels like a no-duh once I remember that they literally have some versions where they dress up to look like dinosaurs, Charizard, or wear a vest that is mostly monsters in Scarlet and Violet while having horns on their head. Dude does have a Gyarados on his vest, which isn't in the monster egg group, but we describe Gyarados as a monstrous beast anyway. The human-like egg group is exactly how it sounds, having 70 Pokemon within it, as it takes up 6.83% of all Pokemon. Fully bipedal Pokemon, walking on 2 legs, having 2 arms, with the most common typing of Pokemon being the Psychic or Fighting types. The Mimes, the Hitmons, the Charcadet line, me smacking the thing that was on my arm, oops, lots of Pokemon that you would expect to see here, not the ones that I smacked. But what I find more interesting are the Pokemon who belong in this group and other groups, such as Gardevoir, who is part of the Amorphous group, meaning that it can have eggs with a number of different ghost Pokemon, which is incredibly strange until you remember that many ghost Pokemon are creatures that feed on spirits or emotions. Gardevoir does something very similar, as its line is attached to the power of emotion, and even Ralts does become warmer after absorbing positive thoughts, which I have usually attributed to being some sort of metabolism. Many of the other Pokemon here make sense and fall into some easier to understand egg groups, like Hawlucha, who is also in the flying egg group. Who would have guessed? It has wings, it is a flying type. Grapploct, who is in the Water 1 group. Grimmsnarl, who is a fairy. Pretty straightforward, and it'll make even more sense as we go through those other egg groups later. Bugs, taking up 91 Pokemon at 8.88% of the total. And of course, they're bugs. If you think of a bug Pokemon or bug type Pokemon, it will be here, but there are some fun exceptions to this rule, such as Gligar, who is a ground flying type. This is not just because it is a scorpion, which is an arachnid, but we also have the scorpion fly, which is likely an inspiration for it and has an entirely different diet. This nasty looking creature primarily feeds on decaying fruit and insects, not even close to being the terrifying hunter, blood drinking Gligar and Gliscor can be. But at least it makes it clear as to why it's here in the bug egg group based on those inspirations. The list of Pokemon that shares the bug egg group with others is actually fairly short and has a couple of worthwhile mentions. Paris is here because of the mushroom on its back being a separate parasitic organism, allowing it to be in the grass egg group. Which brings me to the next minor point, which is the fact that Pokemon as a whole like to take their fungus and put them into the plants egg group, which pains me a little bit, unfortunately, but oh well. Any fungi Pokemon are plant Pokemon, but for the love of everything, I beg of you, do not ever say that fungi are plants in the real world, but we'll talk about our plant Pokemon later. The flying egg group is also exactly how it sounds, being a group generally comprised of birds, but also having others such as bats and pterosaurs. They are composed of 73 Pokemon with 7.12% of the total. Again, fairly straightforward, with me pointing out more of our focus towards the outliers, such as Wingull, who is also in the Water 1 egg group. And while on the surface you might say that, sure, it's a seagull, it makes perfect sense, I'd like to see you say that this bird should be able to have an egg with Pokemon such as Lapras, Marshtomp, or Pyukumuku. And of course, I know I'm thinking too hard about this, but that's what I'm here for anyway. As Wingull smashing its Cloaca up against Galarian Stunfisk sounds like a horrible time to me, and it should sound terrible to you as well, because yes, Galarian Stunfisk, the bear trap that it is also in the Water 1 and Amorphous egg group. But we'll talk about that later. I'm becoming a broken record saying that, but I don't want to overload you with my info dump that I'm doing anyway. As a note, Wattrel is also in the same exact egg groups as Wingull, because despite its electric flying typing, it is still a seabird. The specific being a storm petrel who can indicate bad weather at sea, whereas Kilowattrel takes it further as a frigate bird who has very similar physical characteristics while also being a bird that does like to steal from seagulls. This helps explain why these two Pokemon lines are in the same region of Paldea, but they are often not found near each other as they naturally butt heads with each other. Imagine like a Romeo and Juliet situation, but it's Wingull and Wattrel. Now, I will admit that it's moments like this that do make me question whether or not I should make my own family tree in Pokemon, but have it entirely based on Pokemon eggs. Would it be the most accurate? I doubt it, but it would also be nice as something that could help reveal some hidden connections that are often missed. Back to the flying egg group Pokemon though, basically if it is a water flying type, it is in the flying and water 1 egg group, as it brings in a whole new meaning to waterfowl, such as for Pokemon like Ducklet. The only other one that might not seem immediately obvious is a Pokemon like Farfetch'd, who is also in the field egg group, and I would like to assume that Farfetch'd is here because its line doesn't really fly that much, if at all, despite their duck origins. But even Pokemon such as Espathra are purely in the flying egg group, which, yeah, adds a little bit of confusion to it all, but they're birds. And now that I look at it closer, Sigilyph is also in the flying egg group, making the living Nazca line able to continually create more of their kind if they wouldn't just blast everything that comes within their territory that they patrol. And I know I keep taking mini tangents on this, but I gotta keep this interesting somehow. And can you just imagine like a Sigilyph that patrols the area in which the egg is supposed to hatch, and it fires upon its own egg because it was a foreign creature in its patrol zone? Just silent child! Moving on to the field egg group, we have terrestrial creatures, Pokemon that are land-based and are primarily based on mammals. There are always exceptions, which get incredibly weird because we get a mixing of mammals, reptiles, and birds here. I'm sure that's going to induce some sort of aneurysm in some of my biology major people, but oh well, I have to stick to the truth, and they hold 27.12% of all Pokemon, with 278 creatures total within this field egg group. Massive section. Nice and easy though, we do get plenty of dogs, cats, horses, monkeys all here. The entire Eevee line is solely within the field A group, but then it begins to get messy when we see Pokemon such as Dunsparce here. And sure, you can say, oh, Dunsparce is a Tsuchinoko, meaning that it is mythical to begin with and we can just kind of place it anywhere, but the Tsuchinoko is just a fat little snake. Very adorable in the Yu-Gi-Oh card Danger Tsukinoko, or Tsuchinoko, not Suki. No, we're not taking the avatar character Suki and turning her into a Tsuchinoko, but either way, that's all irrelevant. I suppose we could let it pass since it is a land dweller and it isn't really depicted to have a scaly body, but it still sits weird with me. Another that might bother you is finding that we have the Torchic line nestled exclusively in the field A group. Once again, being a terrestrial chicken or rooster, I suppose. There really isn't another egg group you could throw it in since it isn't a flying type Pokemon, and since egg groups are usually established by their first form or their first released form. Then, of course, we can't consider Combusken's human-like body. We jump further down the list to find that Sandile, who is an entirely land-based crocodile, and Blood Moon Ursaluna are here, with Blood Moon Ursaluna somehow not going sterile after hundreds of years, which does make me think about another very interesting point that I will take a tangent on, and I promise that this will tie back into the Pokemon daycare. When we break down the existence of creatures to their absolute bare bones purpose, you, me, literally every other living being, we are all meant to just grow strong, have children to continue our genetics, and then we die when we can no longer produce children, so that way we are not taking up more resources. This is why a quote-unquote fit creature will be seen as one that is within general parameters, defined as being able to do exactly that when we think of it with a very strict lens. And in the past, it seems as though the mechanical process of this has caused a lot of misunderstanding, all to the point of where people used to believe that animals did not have emotions or personalities, that they were simply flesh robots that mate and then die, but that is not the case. There's far more to this beautiful world, of course, especially as we humans take care of those who are reaching the end of their lifespans, our elderly, checking on them, giving them love and care to them, providing to them even when they're unable to provide in any capacity other than knowledge and compassion. That we may even take care of other people's children in kindness. But we aren't the only ones to do this, we found out. Meerkats will care for each other, not just breaking the tails of scorpions to help teach the young to hunt, but also providing for the elderly who can no longer hunt. Elephants will care for the deceased by placing dirt upon the fallen form in a ritualistic burial, something that they're not really taught. Geese do in fact cry out on their return from migration in hopes that their loved ones that they left behind are still alive. These are all things that we thought were just myth. Things we thought were us placing our morals and values upon creatures around us, and that it was all in our head, but it's not. The world around us is far more beautiful and caring than we might believe, and I feel like people need to hear that a lot more. Of course, there are still tons of absolutely terrifying creatures and people out there, but there is far more to life in animals than breeding and dying. And I think Pokemon exemplifies that best outside of the mainline games. For we see species such as Machamp and Sharpedo racing each other for fun, or Torterra providing a home to other smaller Pokemon, that all of these Pokemon do not even share an egg group with one another, but they coexist. This is how we see that Pokemon compatibility within the daycare is nothing more than just their ability to breed with one another. It isn't whether they actually like each other or not, it's about whether or not they can have an egg. So at least you can feel a little bit happier knowing that your Pokemon do enjoy each other's company, they just won't have children together. And as a quick note, I am currently developing something. I'm not going to name the channel just yet, but I am in development that over the next 2, maybe 3 months, there will be a second channel being released that will focus entirely on the world around us, about real science, real history, really sticking to ecology for the most part, but I want to be able to share the knowledge that I absorb and maybe even interview many people who are far more educated than myself. So keep your eyes out for that and continue supporting this channel, because that channel will not detract from the videos I release here. It'll just be extra and fun content that really expands on the things that I kind of feed you a little bit here and there through these videos. Moving on down our list, Huecoco is also purely in the field group, being another purely terrestrial crocodile. But what I actually love to see here is Orthworm. This is because worms are not insects. More specifically, Orthworm is just another pun, as we have Lumbricus terrestris, otherwise commonly known as the earthworm. Though despite that, due to the soil it consumes, its body has transformed and been maintained to have a metal consistency, thus making it a steel type purely and not be a ground type. Oh well, they're a little scary, I have to admit, since it does have arms, which also makes it not a worm, as it's also a reference to like bullet trains and the people walking out of them. And then it also has an average height of about 8 feet or 2.5 meters and a weight of 683 pounds or 310 kilograms. So that's a really scary, massive worm, even if we weren't talking about the Titan form. Then we finally jump over to the Pokemon that are in the Field Egg group and another egg group. The first of which being Ekans, who shares the Dragon Egg group and yet is not a Dragon type Pokemon. Yet, I say. Legend ZA, I'm looking at you. Arbok could use some love. And I mean, Corbeau is right there. But even more interesting is that we will find Pikachu as part of the Field Egg group, but also in the Fairy Egg group, which is something that can be said about a number, if not all, of the other Pikachu clones, or rather cousins, such as Pachirisu, Dedenne, Togedemaru, and maybe Morpeko if you consider that a Pikachu clone or not. I would, since all of them share both the Field and Fairy egg groups. Meanwhile, Minun and Plusle would just be in the Fairy egg group. We get some of our terrestrial waterfowl, such as Psyduck, the Nidos, since they are once again partially rabbits in terms of their inspiration, and then Seal and Dugong, which is because they're based on sea lions, and those are known as mammals, once again making it very clear why they are in Field and Water 1 egg groups. And don't worry, I will talk about the Water egg groups very soon. It is coming up, because this little combination of Field and Water 1 also includes the Wooper line. So you might be starting to see a bit of a pattern here, especially when you start considering their lifestyles or their habitats. But we'll get there soon enough. A strange outlier is finding that the C-Dot line is a Field and Grass egg group. Grass makes sense, but the reason for the Field egg group may just simply be because as a Nuzleaf or even Shiftry, they are representative of the Tengu. The Tengu being a group of various yokai that have a massive slew of different characteristics, the most common of which being their long nose and deep red skin. Some are sacred, some are evil, but the most important detail, I think, is that there are some stories of the Tengu who have been cast down from their god, and their wings have been removed. This follows through as to why Shiftry, who is rumored to have once been a big, beautiful bird before being cast down to the earth, no longer has its wings or its beak. Thus, that is also how it lost its flying egg group and became one with the Field egg group, cast from the heavens down to the earth below. And we'll talk about them a little bit more later when we do talk about the plant egg group. It is also through this group itself that we get the infamous Skitty and Wailord, or famous, however you view it, I guess, which I, of course, could not resist drawing for the thumbnail of this. Now, Skitty belongs to the Field and Fairy egg groups, while Wailord belongs to the Field and Water 2 egg groups. Water so good, they done made a sequel. But this is all simply because Wailord is a whale, meaning it is a mammal, just like Skitty is a cat who is a mammal. And I will say now, funnily enough, while I was drawing the thumbnail, my lovely fiance, who knows nothing about Pokemon, bless her soul, looked over to me and asked, is that a whale? Yes, dear, that is a whale Pokemon. I didn't think that they'd have a whale Pokemon. If you can think of an animal, it is a Pokemon. She then proceeds to look up a slew of animals and ask if they were Pokemon, such as a moose, llama, various sharks, and more, all while I briefly explained that the small house cat and the whale can also produce an egg together. Those interactions happen fairly often, considering I usually draw my thumbnails while we're just relaxing for the afternoon. But to move on, I do feel bad for a couple of Pokemon, such as Tandemaus or the super timid Sobble, who are roughly the same size or smaller than Skitty, though at least Tandemaus doesn't have to worry because it is not a gendered Pokemon, meaning that it can only breed with Ditto, but we'll get there later. Once again, we do find another snake in Seviper, who is also in the Dragon A group, denoting their ancestral heritage and worship, but to follow, we also get Scraggy, who shares these egg groups too, with both Arbok and Scraggy being Pokemon that have had some spotlight in the Pokemon ZA trailer in which Corbo was introduced. And I can guarantee, through understanding that Scraggy is a partner Pokemon of a main character, they will get a Mega form. It's just a question of what will that form be and how does it tie into its ancestral line if it does. Because I don't believe that Scraggy will necessarily change typings from the fighting dark type that it is. There are more field snakes like Snivy, who is a vine snake, landing it firmly within the field and grass egg groups, but I believe the last one of interest here is that Cufant and Fido are not only in the field egg group, but they're also within the mineral egg group. Cufant being fairly obvious considering its steel composition and diet of minerals from within caves, but Fido is yeast, so it's a little odd that we would consider a microorganism to be a mineral, but here we are, I suppose. In the first of the Water trilogy, we have Pokemon that are a bit of a catch-all. This is because not only do we have Pokemon that are not just living entirely within the water, but there are some semi-aquatic and amphibious Pokemon here too. Saying semi-aquatic and amphibious sounds redundant at first, but amphibious is more about the idea of having a larval stage that use their gills to pull oxygen from the water, while their adult stage will have lungs to pull oxygen from the air, which honestly makes so much of this so much more messier when we try to discern the hard specifics of biology regarding a number of these Pokemon. Now, all of our frog Pokemon are purely a Water 1A group, firmly landing amphibians here, with the exception of Bulbasaur the Toad and Croagunk the Tree Frog. Bulbasaur at least makes sense, considering it is more reliant on the flowering bud it bears on its back, but Croagunk is purely in the human-like A group, while still living in the swamps of the Pokemon world. This kind of bothers me, considering that we would remove it from having a genetic relation to so many other Pokemon we would expect it to be related to, meaning that somewhere along the line, theoretically speaking, Croagunk's ancestors became more and more terrestrial, opting to live in wetter environments, and this is backed up by one of its abilities, Dry Skin, which is not held by every single Croagunk. So they gave up whatever water-based abilities they had at some point and chose to exist in these swamps and marshes instead, until eventually they are no longer biologically related to the rest of the frogs or toads within the Pokemon world, which is a very interesting case overall. We do find Clamperl here, who is already a headache that I have mentioned once before in a different video or two, which makes it more than once. But since this is a Pokemon breeding video, I must now explain how Clamperl is formed. Clamperl is effectively stated to be different from the pearl that is within its body, or that it produces within its body. The fun thing about clams is that they are said to be filter feeders, allowing water in, and then they may create pearls as any form of irritant, namely sand, is then coated in something that is called nacre to stop it from irritating them, and then they could expel it. What could this thing irritating them be? Well, in the case of Clamperl, this is eel sperm and eggs. This is because there are eels that will release their substances into the water and let nature take its course. As all of this floats in the water from Goribus or Huntail, as either one can be male and or female, Clamperl filters it into their body, gets irritated by all of that being in their mouth, which is disgusting to say, and while trying to coat it, I suppose, it turns it into an egg, or rather an egg is formed during this process that will eventually gestate and hatch into one of its evolutions. The world becomes their oyster, and we all pay the price without getting any child support. So, by these standards, there should be no reason whatsoever that Pokemon eggs are formed by Clamperl or Goribus and Huntail. And don't worry, there are many other Pokemon, or rather nearly an entire A group of Pokemon, that should not be laying eggs at all that I will get to. I would love to assume that our amphibians aren't laying Pokemon eggs, but are rather releasing their jelly eggs, but that just isn't stated or confirmed by Pokemon itself, so we have to go against the science for the sake of Pokemon's pseudoscience. And to make things even weirder, Pyukumuku is also here, a sea bunny, or more aptly a sea cucumber, based on its demeanor, actions, and diets. Because yes, there are sea cucumbers that can expel their intestines to scare away potential predators or distract them, much like Pyukumuku can. They're both also filter feeders. So because of this, it would be safe to say that, unfortunately, just like sea cucumbers in real life, or the real world, Pyukumuku is committing external fertilization, as they too release eggs and sperm into the water, though some species may perform a form of asexual reproduction, which is known as fission in their case. In other words, Pyukumuku gets split apart, and then you have two Pyukumuku before you. I feel like I'm starting to say a tongue twister. You can never defeat this Pokemon, for by defeating it, you have now created two enemies in its wake. A Pyukumuku Hydra will eventually stand before you. Look, I'm gonna be real with you. There are a lot of Pokemon, or rather creatures in the water, I'm starting to mix realities, that reproduce through external fertilization, and this is just another adaptation that exists. By all means, we can apply this term to fish, salamanders, frogs, and more. External fertilization, that is. Another word for this is called spawning, as you may be aware of, as this often occurs in damp areas to ensure their gametes don't dry out, being those little spongy eggs that I mentioned, or jelly eggs, essentially. Though in the case of Pyukumuku, eels, urchins, and more, they are releasing thousands, or even millions of their essence into the waters with specific timing in hopes that not only do they form more of their own kind, but also that the waters favor their species and their children find a better home with more food and less predators in a place far away from where they are through the use of the currents. Now we move on from the baby making talk on the microscopic level and continue on the macro level, as we have a few more examples that share the water A group with other A groups, such as Dratini, who is also, of course, in the dragon A group, being a sea serpent of its own kind. We also start getting into the very interesting cases of Wooper, Corsola, and their variant forms. These Pokemon, amongst many of our others, such as Obstagoon, are very interesting because despite them being regional variants, they are still part of these same egg groups. Even Clodsire can still be found in Water 1 and Field, just the same as the original Wooper we were introduced to. All of them, again, being amphibious or semi-aquatic. This is interesting to me at the very least because Clodsire, Corsola, and Obstagoon, despite them being different and are considered an entirely new species, they are still genetically viable for creating more of their own kind from other regions. And to better explain this, how about we dig into the case of breeding with Everstones and regional variants to break up some of this egg group knowledge, especially as we are essentially complete with Water 1 with only one exception, which we will get into after our next section. Something I learned through all this research is that Everstones can be massively important in helping you get the Pokemon that you are looking for. Let's say you took 2 regular Wooper while in Paldea. If you breed them, then you will result in a Paldean Wooper, which makes it seem as though their genetics do not actually play a part in their creation, but it still does. This is because Paldea is already noted to have been an area in which Wooper are unable to live freely within bodies of water and are thus pushed out and forced to adapt to the environment, producing a new film upon their body to stay moist in between splashing around these small pools of water momentarily. Through this, we can assume that your hatched Pokemon has either A, grown a little between hatching and you seeing it somehow, allowing it to maintain or rather become this Paldean form, B, it will slowly adapt to become this form after hatching because of its environment, or C, it already knew where it was and what the world was like before it even hatched. As such, its body changed to be readily adapted to the world it will soon enter. And I'm here to tell you that option C is more likely than you might have believed. From Discovery, I bring you this. In 1997, a team of scientists reared several chicken eggs in 2 different incubators. One was a normal, sterile incubator, while the other one was infused with the sweet, fruity aroma of strawberries. Sometimes they even rubbed the experimental group with strawberry aromas straight onto their egg shells. Once the chicks hatched, much to the scientists' amusement, the few baby chickens that had been exposed to strawberries while still embryos loved the scent and taste of it. They liked strawberry-flavored water and spent more time in strawberry-scented spaces. Loving strawberries doesn't have much of an impact on a chicken's life, but since then, a growing body of research across the animal kingdom started noticing that many oviparous animals start being aware of their surroundings, predatory risks, and food availability while still an embryo by feeling, smelling, and seeing through their eggs. And this is something that is fairly consistent even within Pokemon, as there are cases in which they have been able to learn moves or interact with their environments before they hatch. This could mean that the moves that they inherit from their parents is more than just strict genetics, but rather learned behaviors from watching them from inside the egg, which again is something that happens in real life. Now, with this in mind, there are ways in which we can influence the outcome of a Pokemon and its variant's form. For example, a Paldean Wooper with a female Quagsire holding an Everstone will result in a Jetonian Wooper. To make this as clear as possible, it is stated, if a Pokemon has regional forms, then its offspring will always hatch into the form native to that region. However, if a parent of a foreign form is holding an Everstone and is from the same evolutionary line as the offspring, then the offspring will hatch into that parent's form. The only assumption I can make of this is the idea of dominant and recessive genes being expressed through base form and higher stage forms, or that parent's form. Otherwise, I'm a bit of a lost, or at a bit of a lost, especially as an Everstone is necessary rather than something such as an Oval Stone, especially as the Oval Stone is an item that is made to look like an egg and help Happiny evolve into Chansey. But my nitpicking aside, the same result will be had if a female Quagsire holding an Everstone is bred with a Ditto within Paldea, resulting in Johto's Wooper. And then if any other Pokemon holds the Everstone that is unrelated but able to breed with a female Wooper, then it will still result in a Paldean Wooper, as that is essentially irrelevant as it is not a parent of that line. Also, it is very important to note that the mother is the species of the Pokemon that you wish to produce or have offspring of. This is because, you know, eggs in a body, eggs out of the body. At least we can assume that they don't have to deal with Shark Week. And if you are a male in the audience and you don't understand that joke, that's okay. That's for everyone else who does understand to enjoy. Now we get into a Pokemon that is neither male or female, but is technically both at the same time, as we have what has been noted as the Prince or Princess of the Sea, Manaphy. Now, to clarify, it has been referred to as the Prince of the Sea within the Temple of the Sea movie, while being called both Prince and Princess of the Sea depending on whether you watch the British English or American English version in the original Pokemon Ranger game, and by watch, I meant to say play. But why is this the case? Because sure, we could just chalk this up to the idea that it was a mistake, but remember that translation teams still do work alongside the creators or the original Japanese creators in order to produce something that lines up with their ideal image of a product. And so I present to you a creature that was loved in Japan. To what degree I cannot confirm, but when we look at Manaphy, Phione, and the Sea Angel, we find a lot of similarities. These similarities go all the way down to even one specific image produced by the Monterey Bay Aquarium, in which we see this red orb glowing within the Sea Angel, as there are even yellow pieces near it, looking unmistakably like the Manaphy egg itself. So basically, by the way, we're looking at its internal organs. But what I find most interesting is that they are hermaphroditic creatures, meaning that they are, or rather they have, both male and female sex organs. They have finger-like tentacles that they use to hunt things, such as sea butterflies, which do seem similar to the tentacles we see, or the probes that we see on Phione and Manaphy. And those sea butterflies are unfortunately creatures that are becoming more and more at risk with the rising temperatures of oceans due to acidification that follows, that will eventually wear down those creatures' calcium shells, which then takes away a food source for our sea angels. Nevertheless, from color to general shape and even their appendages, it becomes very clear that these are one of the major inspirations for both Manaphy and Phione, and I've always suspected that thanks to Phione not evolving into Manaphy and their pattern of being born in a warm sea while Manaphy lives on the cold seafloor, that it seems as though through time and maturity, they may be changing their sex rather than being hermaphroditic as the real creatures are. But I'll let you decide that for yourself, since we will likely never get a direct answer. Oh, and as one last note, sea angels do mate for an extended period of time, then release their fertilized eggs into the great wild. Can't find a good picture of that though, since, or at least the eggs swarm essentially, since these little friends are already so small, they're already less than an inch or 1 to 2 centimeters in length. And I really wanted to find it because I wanted to see if maybe their eggs would match super close to Manaphy and Phione's eggs, but no avail. Either way, thank you Monterey Bay Aquarium for every single time that I talk about these Pokemon. I'm able to pull information from you and a little bit of footage or like photo from what you guys have. Time for the sequel to Water, as we have Water 2, with there being 34 Pokemon taking up 3.32%, and mainly being fish or fish-like, with some being based on cephalopods. Also, I just realized I never made this clear, Manaphy and Phione are in the Water 1 and Fairy Egg groups. Now, with Water 2, it's a fairly small group, all in all, without any real outliers. We find Goldeen, Carvanha, Chinchou, Basculin, all of them are fish. Though at least with Chinchou and Lantern, they're more akin to like football fish, which it is still a fish, but it's also very strange. And I find it funny to see Tatsugiri here, as it is sushi. more particularly nigiri sushi, a type of sushi shaped by the hands rather than rolled. It is a pure dragon type, but people suspect that Tatsugiri's dragon type may be a reference to the East Asian cultural association of koi and carp in general with dragons. Curly form's curved posture may even be a reference to the Sachihoko, a sea monster in Japanese folklore with the head of a dragon or tiger or lion and the body of a carp, covered entirely in black or gray scales. And according to the tale, Sachihoko lives in the cold northern ocean. Its broad fins and tail always point towards heaven, and its dorsal fins have numerous sharp spikes. It can swallow a massive amount of water and hold it in its belly, as well as summon clouds and control the rain. Although believed to have come from the sea, they are often constructed high on the roof, standing upside down. And where do we find our Pokemon? In the North Province of Scarlet and Violet only, within Casaroya Lake, which is effectively our cold northern quote-unquote ocean, even though it's a lake. Tatsugiri's lobed fins and its ability to walk on land may also be inspired by lungfishes and lungfish-like species, such as the Polypterus senegalis. I'm going to put the word on the screen, someone can correct me please, sometimes known as the dragonfish. Now we take a glance at the Pokemon who are within this age group and others. For example, Magikarp, who follows the same idea of koi becoming dragons. Remoraid and Octillery makes a lot more sense now, considering it transforms from a fish to an octopus, who we'd also expect, or we do see, in the Water 1 egg group. Same can be said in terms of others being semi-aquatic, such as Inkay, and then Finizen is here in the Field A group as well, because once again, it is also a mammal, not just a creature that exists in the water. So hopefully what is happening more and more as we go along is that you're starting to recognize the patterns more and more, because part of my goal with this is to help you accurately guess over half of the time what Pokemon belong to what age groups. I know it's starting to work for me at least, and I'm starting to feel more comfortable with being able to identify Pokemon without having to consult a chart. But before we continue, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this so far, please make sure that you do subscribe, and why don't you leave a comment about maybe your first shiny Pokemon that you ever got, or about, I don't know, just a random animal fact based on any of the animals that we've talked about, or if there's something I missed or something that you'd argue against, bring the evidence towards me, as I love to read the comments in my free time and learn from you just as much as you learn from me, because I'm one person and I can't catch everything anyway. In addition, comments and watch time are the best way to boost a video's reach, as told by YouTube itself, so you'd also be doing a great thing for the channel itself. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, you can always become a member of the channel on here or Patreon for as little as $3 a month, which does help with making sure that I can commission artists for thumbnails that I don't want to draw, and they could do an infinitely better job on. But with that, I digress, and once again, thank you for watching, and on with the video. Now, the Water Trilogy comes to a close with Water 3, a section that is full of invertebrates, which means jellyfish, crabs, starfish, sea lilies, we got them all, baby. Oddly enough, Wiglet is also here, who is not an invertebrate, because if we're basing it on its real-life inspiration, which is very, very close to what it looks like, it is a garden eel. But I can forgive Pokemon, considering that both of them wave around in the same way, waiting for their next meal to come by. When we look at others who share the Water 3 age group with another, this extends into fossils, such as Ammonite and Kabuto, who also exist within Water 1, once again being semi-aquatic, despite their real-life inspirations maybe not being as semi-aquatic, ignoring horseshoe crabs. But many of these bad boys are sharing Water 1 and Water 3 here, and there are some that are really, really standing out. Beginning with Skorupi, who is also in the bug egg group. The assumption that makes the most sense to me is that this is a reference to the sea scorpion, a creature that was an apex predator hundreds of millions of years ago. And who else do we find here that has inspiration not just from horseshoe crabs, but also sea scorpions, Kabuto and Kabutops? What this means is that there is a chance that Skorupi and Kabuto should be very distantly related to each other, and the more I talk about this, the more I really do want to make that family tree video based primarily upon egg groups. The next one really weirds me out because we have Arcan in Water 3 and Flying egg groups. The accepted community reason for this is just because it's a fossil. And while we don't see Pokemon such as Amorphous and Tyrantrum here, I suppose we could accept this, as many of our Pokemon in Water 3 can survive out of the water rather easily, but more aptly, a lot of the other fossils that are not found here are more akin to the lizards or dragons, anything like that that would then land them in those monster egg groups. The mineral egg group is having fun getting their rocks off. I'm sorry. I couldn't even say that without smiling or laughing, but pretty much any Pokemon that is composed of inorganic material can be found here. They hold 84 Pokemon at 8.2%. They could be rocks, they can be metal, they can be crystals, and then we have many others that resemble man-made objects or take control of them, such as what we find with Golurk and Garbodor, man-made and trash that came to life due to a chemical reaction. On the Trubbish Garbodor side, that is. I don't know what people are throwing away, but that is some chemical X levels of stuff right there if you're creating life from your trash. Now, I will say, I'm going to mention it or talk about it a little bit more later, but a lot of the Pokemon that are here are also found in the genderless egg group, meaning that you need a Ditto in order for them to have offspring. Now, speaking of Golurk, Aegis/Klefki, Dhelmise, Shedinja, all of these are Pokemon that are partially ghosts and are all Pokemon that are only within the mineral egg group. This is because they are composed of these minerals, while Shedinja is the strangest at first until you realize that it is just a leftover husk that was shed from a cicada Pokemon. I suppose you could also say Dhelmise is another strange one, since it is stated to be the soul of seaweed adrift in the waves that had become reborn as this Pokemon, and then it maintains itself with new infusions of seabed, detritus, and seaweed. Then this makes it really hard to pin down exactly what Dhelmise is, especially when another entry states that seaweed merged with debris from a sunken ship to then be reborn as this Pokemon. So maybe some Dhelmise are the seaweed, some are the soul of seaweed, maybe they're just inhabiting the ship and are the souls of those who have passed long ago. It's just a mess overall. Now, the ones that share this group with another one is something that really does fascinate me, and I know I sound like a broken record, but this is all very interesting anyway to me. Pokemon like Snorunt's line, who share this with the fairy egg group, as they are essentially wandering spirits of the cold. Dwebble and Crustle being bugs that are actually hermit crabs that rely on their rocky homes for safety. Yamask being spirits bound by masks or stone in their Galarian form, as they are also part of the Amorphous group. And then Bergmite also being a monster, considering that the ice on its body is just a shell. The list does go on and on with a number of Pokemon, most being fairly straightforward, though another that might catch your eye is the Mineral and Fairy egg group Pokemon Phalanx, but we'll talk about them later, and it actually makes a lot more sense once we do. As a final note here, both Sinistea and Poltergeist have Mineral and Amorphous as egg groups, making it so that once again, despite not being biologically related, they technically could have produced if they weren't also genderless creatures. Also, let me correct myself, they might not be genderless, or at least gender unknown, but depending on the Pokemon, that feels like one and the same. Ghosts, ghouls, and ghasts abound. The Amorphous group calls all who bear no true singular form. We find blobs, inanimate objects, and those soft-bodied organisms with plenty of ghost types being here, as they take up 63 Pokemon at 6.15%. This one should be fairly easy to guess right off the bat with Pokemon such as Grimer and Ghastly. But even Coughing is here since it is said to be composed of gases. We extend it out to Wobbuffet being our punching bag that is kind of blob-like, or Slugma, who is just mobile lava. The one that should surprise you to find here would be Chimecho, who takes its resemblance after a Furin, otherwise known as a Japanese glass wind chime. What I assume the reason for this is that the Furin, which have been produced since the Edo period, are believed to come from Buddhist Futaku bells. Due to the roots in Buddhism, it is traditionally believed that the Furin can also ward off evil spirits. And while it doesn't directly affect the weather, the sound of the chime from the Furin is described as cooling and relaxing. while also invoking a feeling of calmness. So you can take this as our Chimecho being an honorary spirit through one of its inspirations, or you could just look at it and say, yeah, that's a strangely shaped creature, we're just gonna slap it down as Amorphous. Now the rest, again, straightforward. Even when we look at those that share this group with others, as they're all mostly being ghosts, outside of the Jello and Quesaloses, or the squiggly eel that is Electros, Shellos as our gastropod, Milcery, or Milcery rather, being milk, Castform being nothing but water molecules, Pincurchin being a spiky blobby ball, or Stunfisk just flopping it around. But with the majority of these creatures being ghosts, it brings me to our next strange case that we need to talk about further. How does breeding ghost Pokemon even work? Aren't they supposed to be dead? Well, if you've seen many of my other videos, you already know that our ghost Pokemon are not actual ghosts. Mimikyu can actually die and become a ghost as shown in the anime. Ghastly is just a collection of poisonous gases brought to life thanks to the manga's information. And even Dragapult is at least partially solid, despite being an ancient being revived as a partial ghost. That last one gets a little bit weird, as Dreepy does try to eat Clauncher, but is unable to since it is a ghost and doesn't need to eat. Nevertheless, many of our ghost Pokemon are not entirely ghosts, making it so that way they can pass away in some fashion. Some have power over spiritual essence, others are partially ghosts, some just behave similarly to ghosts, and then there are a couple who dine on emotions or spiritual energy. But what you're likely waiting for is the explanation regarding Phantump, since it is supposed to be a lost child reincarnated as a Pokemon, or even Yamask, who was reincarnated from a person who passed away a long time ago. Why are we able to breed these Pokemon if they're reincarnations? Well, we aren't just committing mass murder out here. Instead, there are a couple of possibilities that we'll go through and that I'll partially debunk. Option 1. Those are all rumors. Pokemon are not reincarnations of people. They are not created from inanimate objects, and that is not the case, considering we have seen things such as Banette in the anime be brought to life due to it being an abandoned doll by Nurse Joy. So that option is out for starters. Option 2. You are unable to actually breed these Pokemon in existence, or into existence. This is simply a mechanic that exists in the games, so we can enjoy slamming a foreign Ditto into the same playpen and letting them produce enough babies to cause the ecosystem to collapse just so we can get our shiny Pokemon. Once again though, this is not the case, as in the anime, not only do we have a Rowlet egg shown, but also a Ghastly egg. Though I will admit Rowlet is a bit of a strange case and doesn't technically count since it just bears spiritual power, even though it is a ghost-type Pokemon and is not a ghost itself. Though Ghastly, once again, is said to be born from gas, so either way, it's a strange one even if we include the 5% spiritual essence that the Pokedex states its body is composed of. That is also not a mistake though, because the Ghastly egg appears in Pokemon Journeys, the showdown at the Gates of Warp. A pretty scary episode, I admit, since Dialga takes the Pokemon of the teams that are present and reverts them all into eggs. And so I propose to you option 3, the middle ground, which I believe is correct, because I've stated many times across videos, there is often no singular correct answer to everything in the universe, whether it be Pokemon or the real world. Instead, we have a combination of answers that give us our solutions or our truth. In this case, our ghost Pokemon are still Pokemon, and as such, they can breed. Some might even just break off and become new Pokemon, considering Grimer can do exactly that. Even Poltegeist will infect teacups to create Sinistea. And I know Grimer's not a ghost Pokemon, it's in the Amorphous group, so, you know. But that means that no actual breeding is required and they technically reproduce asexually. Meanwhile, there are other Pokemon that, through a rare instance, are formed through reincarnation or by other means. In other words, sure, some Phantump are reincarnated children who were lost in the woods, but not all of them were. Plus, this makes it a lot easier to explain why we can breed Pokemon such as Spiritomb, who is supposed to be a collection of 108 evil spirits, so everything is on a case-by-case basis with a number of potential reproduction methods available dependent on the Pokemon. I don't want to admit what I'm about to because it feels very vague, but the fairy-type egg group basically just includes Pokemon that are commonly known as quote-unquote cute Pokemon. They are smaller than most other Pokemon, are mostly composed of Pokemon that are a head with arms and legs rather than a full actual torso, think Jigglypuff, and of course a majority of them are fairy-type Pokemon. There are 66 Pokemon here at 6.44% of all Pokemon. We have Clefairy, Minun and Plusle, Hatenna, Indeedee, and it all seems normal or easily explainable until we dive into the ones that are in this group and another A group, because sure, Hoppip is cute, I'll let that slide. Snubbull is seen as cute within the lore of the Pokemon world, and then we land on Shroomish. And I say this with respect because Shroomish, more aptly Breloom, is cute to me and is one of my favorite fighting types of all time, but at the very least, again, Shroomish is not cute. And it's also the only mushroom Pokemon here, so unless Game Freak is explaining it as being a cute Pokemon, then I can only imagine it is here because it matches the general design shapes, or it is meant to represent the fairy rings that mushrooms may make. This is easy to understand, and in the end, if the Pokemon is seen as potentially cute or traditionally cute, it belongs here. Another egg group that bears certain Pokemon that should not have any eggs at all is the Grass Egg group. 89 Pokemon at 8.68% of the total, and if I say plant egg group at any point, forgive me. Every single Pokemon here is a grass type, with very few exceptions, such as Comfey. In fact, that is the only current exception here, but even then, this Pokemon has a symbiotic nature with flowers, so it's a bit of an oddball. Otherwise, many of our other Pokemon here spread seeds or spores wherever they go, or are genuinely just a plant with eyes that will still do exactly that. Spread seeds, spread spores. This includes our fungus Pokemon like Fungus? Sorry, I think my document auto-corrected itself and it was supposed to be Fungus and I was just going to say Fungus. Either way, Fungus and Morlul, literal seeds like Sunkern, Capsicid, who will drop its tooth as a representative of pepper seeds and the capsaicin within them, and it isn't until we start digging into our mixed egg group Pokemon that we find our exceptions, because I would expect Lotad to have eggs, but Seedot to not. In fact, it's a bit strange that they seem to like being noticed by birds, as Seedot will polish its body once a day, though in a later Dex entry, this is explained as in order to expand its habitat, it pretends to be a nut so that bird Pokemon will pick it up and carry it far away, making sense of why it would want to polish itself and be noticed. It would also be very interesting to find out that maybe some of the trees in the areas are actually created by Seedot, who did not evolve into Nuzleaf. This would actually add some really fun theories as to why Shiftry are forest guardians and are seen as being incredibly rare. It's because they're protecting their family as the chosen guardian. Seedots who don't evolve, but simply become the forest itself as actual trees. Moving onwards, the remainder of our grass types can be explained as deriving power from nature or plants, or being part plant, part animal, such as with Tropius, who is a banana dinosaur, who is also included in the Monster A group, or Sprigatito, who can photosynthesize despite being a cat that exists within the Field A group as well, making it a cat-plant hybrid. Long story short, if it is a grass type, odds are it is in the Grass Egg group. With a massive range, we have the Dragon Egg group holding 72 Pokemon at 7.02%. There are, of course, dragons here, but there are also Pokemon that we have discussed already, such as our snakes, lizards, and dinosaurs. This is likely because the dragon typing typically seems to represent ancient origins. A perfect example of a Pokemon not in this egg group, but still unlocking ancient quote-unquote dragon blood, as it states, that was sleeping within it, is Amorphous. It mega evolves and unlocks that dragon nature, turning it into a dragon electric Pokemon. And as a fun note, its name in Japanese is Dendryu, which is quite literally electric dragon. So when Mega Evolution came around, of course they capitalized on that name. Along those lines of Pokemon who are in the Dragon A group but aren't dragons, could be, or actually are, Sceptile, who isn't a dragon unless it mega evolves, or Gyarados, though Gyarados is explained by the legend of the carp, who jumps over the dragon's gate, thus accomplishing their incredibly difficult and almost seemingly impossible goal of swimming up the waterfall. In the case of Magikarp, it becomes a dragon at heart thanks to its goal being complete. And I wasn't expecting to run into Feebas and Melodic here, but they still follow the idea of the serpent and have a great amount of significance within Pokemon in terms of imagery and transformation, even having some significance in places such as Mosui, as it seems to have some level of ancient worship tied to it, with it being in the Crystal Pool, or imagery of it being found around Mosui within Scarlet and Violet. They're also seen as counterparts by the community to Gyarados and Magikarp, so I find it again interesting that they both share the Dragon Egg group. There isn't much else to say here, but the only Pokemon with the Dragon typing that are not found here include Alolan Executor, Cyclizar, Tatsugiri, and of course Amorphous, as I mentioned. Why this is the case is up for you to decide, as you could come up, or we could come up with 100 different reasons that may satisfy and tickle the brain. The last of the A groups, we're gonna just go in one section because they're pretty straightforward, and I need to stop saying that. I've said that maybe 7 or 8 times at this point. But either way, one is the A group in which no eggs have been discovered. This includes our legendary and mythical Pokemon. The other is what is technically designated as the Ditto egg group. Ditto is the only one in that egg group, of course, and while Ditto can be used to breed with any Pokemon that can have an egg to produce the desired Pokemon, there are no Ditto eggs anywhere within Pokemon whatsoever. None in the manga, not the anime, not in the games, spin-offs, nothing. Yet we find Ditto in a number of different regions, so what is happening here? Your guess is as good as mine, honestly. They don't breed with other Ditto, they don't self-replicate, and they even sleep as rocks in order to prevent being attacked, so they are very defensive and sneaky. They are not a failed Mew clone as confirmed, and at best we can say they're just a single cell amoeba or undifferentiated cell, which would help us try to explain why it can transform or replicate other Pokemon through breeding, of course. It's almost as if by breeding, a part of it transforms and fully becomes the new Pokemon permanently. After all, you are getting your IVs, your DNA, everything else from somewhere. And if that is the case, then purely on speculation, I wonder if there are failed Ditto eggs that just become Ditto after the Pokemon has existed for a while. Imagine a Pidgey existing for 3 years as a Pidgey before it just melts and becomes a Ditto. It would be pretty traumatizing, I'll admit, if you saw that in person and had no idea what a Ditto was, because it is a rare Pokemon in lore. Though only with Ditto is it possible to breed the gender unknown Pokemon that exist. These are Pokemon that are simply impossible to tell in universe what gender they are, or even if they actually have a gender at all. This will include Magnemite, Voltorb, and Shedinja, despite them also existing in that Mineral A group. And as I stated, many Mineral A group Pokemon are found here, though a fun one is finding out that Staryu is here, as it is known to actually reproduce asexually. There are even folk tales that state that stardust falling from the sky and into the ocean becomes Staryu, which is theoretically a possibility since we know that they do come from space. Phalanx is also known as or considered a gender unknown Pokemon, but the funniest of them all is Tandemaus, all because it just breeds in its Pokeball when you aren't looking in order to become Mousehold. Then of course the Pokedex states that it has no idea what the relation between these mice could be. Also, I just realized I did not actually explain why Phalanx is in the Fairy A group. It is simply because it is cute, and I agree, the Spartan Kirby is one of the most adorable Pokemon out there, and I will fight anybody who says otherwise. Moving on though, there are only a few Pokemon I want to draw attention to from the unbreedable section. The internet has ruined the word breeding, I realize, and I've said it so many times. But now in this section are all Pokemon that we can't breed in the games, but we know there are multiple of, or have seen children of. Lugia having a child in the animated series. Unknown having a swarm of their kind that even have their own realm. Shaman having entire... hold on, no, I know I've mentioned this before, but we don't have good group names for groups of Pokemon, but Shaman is a hedgehog, so a prickle. That is what a group of hedgehogs are. I didn't think Shaman could get any cuter, but here we are, as we see a prickle of Shaman in the Giratina and the Sky Warrior movie. Nidorina and Nidoqueen are also unable to breed, though I suspect this is because they're already gestating. That's right, everyone, they're eating for 2 because they have a tapeworm. No, in all seriousness though, they are already pregnant and carrying their colony of Nidorans, or they have just given birth. This is shown through their Pokedex entries, Nidorina's being, when feeding its young, it first chews and tenderizes the food, then spits it out for the offspring, while Nidoqueen states it can ensure its spines don't stab and poison their children, now being retractable. Even if they aren't pregnant, we can run with the idea that they are unable to have an egg for a certain period of time after having babies in order for their bodies to recover from the trauma that is childbirth. This can be supported through the Pokemon Adventures manga, where Nidoking are shown fighting for their right to mate with a Nidoqueen as they try to fight for its love. And that just makes all this way more simpler than we could have ever expected. That sentence was not grammatically correct, but Keldeo, as we move on, is directly stated to be a Pokemon that was separated from the rest of its family, rather its parents, during the fire on the Moor of Icarus. It was saved by the Swords of Justice and trained up to become the powerful Pokemon that it is. So no matter what, while we don't know its age group, it is or has to belong to some sort of age group because it canonically has parents. We move on, and despite Carbink turning into Deontay, the Diamond Princess does not belong to an A group. The same can be said for Cosmog, despite its male and female counterparts being labeled as Solgaleo and Lunala as per their lore. In fact, there are tons of Cosmog out there that we just haven't seen because the OG Solgaleo and Lunala body slammed the Tapus of Alola before dumping their children onto the island for the Tapus to protect. But I will say, at the very least, that Cosmog are stated to be born within Ultra Space itself, very similar to how Protostars will begin to form, especially considering Cosmoem is literally called the Protostar Pokemon, so pretty straightforward. I said it again, whatever. Along those same lines, Latios and Latias, Zacian and Zamazenta are all Pokemon with fairly defined genders as well, as they are stated to be those genders. And further than this, none of the Ultra Beasts have discovered A groups, but I think that we can hopefully agree that most, if not all of them, would likely belong to some sort of A group. They are definitively considered Pokemon, as a regular Pokeball can catch them despite there being a low chance of it. I think it's like a 1% chance, and to reinforce that idea, Pokeballs cannot capture humans, so they're not just capturing them even though they're an entirely different creature, because Jessie in the anime was hit by a Pokeball's capture beam and it hurt her immensely, being unable to catch her. So it's just that we don't know how they reproduce and with what groups, probably with nothing from our universe. And it kind of makes me think of pandas and how they don't reproduce in captivity, which humans for the longest time thought that pandas were stupid and dumb and were necessary to keep in enclosures so that way they wouldn't die out, and we forced them to, have babies. But nope, they're not as bad as, we're often made to believe. They just do not like being watched when they're trying to have a child. I felt really weird to say out loud. Along the similar manner to the Ultra Beasts, I imagine the same can be said about the Paradox Pokemon, which are being definitively proven through the anime to be genuine Pokemon that are just from a different timeline from ours. And the last Pokemon that are worth mentioning in this section are the Fossil Abominations from Galar, and that's just because they're sexually inert Pokemon. Think of it as though they were a mule in some twisted, contorted way. Because sure, a donkey and a horse can have a baby, but that baby, the mule, cannot grow up to have children of their own. The difference here is that these four fossil Pokemon are mishmashed puzzle pieces that should not be alive in the first place, as they never existed as the creatures we see them today. So we have all of our A groups defined. Fantastic, but what's next? Well, that would be me finally talking about what the odds are for an egg to appear and the influence of a Pokemon's nature through breeding. From Generation 3 onwards, the compatibility of a Pokemon is determined by a number of factors. These factors determine if an egg is produced or not, and the odds are re-rolled every 256 steps that you take in-game. 256 being the egg cycle itself, within Generation 2, 3, and 7 at the very least. But don't ask me why the number changes, it's irrelevant, it changes by like 1 or 2 steps, but basically it takes, let's say, 10 cycles to hatch an egg for some egg groups. Then that would mean it takes 2,560 steps to hatch the egg, and those cycles depend on egg to egg and on the Pokemon. But back to the chances of an egg appearing, the odds again are re-rolled every 256 steps. We have a 0% chance of an egg even being produced if the Pokemon are in different age groups, are the same gender, are in the no eggs discovered group, or are both in the Ditto group. For the remainder of our groups, you may use the oval charm to increase the overall percent chance of an egg appearing. In this next case, if your Pokemon are different species, let's say a Clodsire and a Bidoof, but they both come from the same trainer, there is a 20% chance of an egg happening without the charm, 40% chance of appearing with the charm. This is just showing that the Pokemon have some biological similarities, and it is possible for them to breed as they do share an A group. It might just take some time for it to work, if you catch my drift. Up next is when we have a different species and different trainers, or same species with the same trainer. Either way, this will then result in the same chances of 50% without the charm or 80% with the charm. One seems to have Pokemon that are very different from each other, maybe an opposites attract situation, while the others seem to show the idea of like-minded individuals sticking close to each other, maybe certain traits that are desired for the creatures to be able to evolve and survive the conditions of the world around them. It's a bit hard to pin down as any singular reason, so I'll just leave those two up to you. The last is breeding Pokemon of the same species that belong to a different original trainer. This comes out to 70% chance without the charm and 88% chance with the charm, the highest chances possible. My only logical guess here is just by doing this, you avoid inbreeding from a species, and yes, inbreeding is absolutely a thing in the Pokemon world, as we look at Alolan Persian's information, stating that its round face is a symbol of wealth, they have bigger, plumper faces, and when they do, they're considered more and more beautiful. This is not only just a reference to being overly prideful and thus having a big head or being big-headed, but also the inbreeding of animals as we have seen in real life. Now, this can all be taken a step further as we talk about shiny odds. Ooh, sparkly shiny Pokemon. These odds change from generation to generation, and I'm gonna be honest with you. There are even in-game bugs that exist within Generation 8 and 9, so unless a patch or anything else has changed it, that this then makes it so that a shiny charm actually lowers the odds of a hatched Pokemon being shiny. Just check information, I couldn't find anything. Otherwise, there are supposed to be personality values attached to what is called the Masuda method to help increase the odds of a shiny appearing. The Masuda method, otherwise known as international hatching, is a fan-made term for the increased chance of shiny Pokemon being produced when breeding Pokemon with different languages of origin. While the standard encounter rate for a shiny Pokemon, either in the wild or by breeding, is 1 in 8,192 from Generation 2 to 5, and 1 in 4,096 in Generation 6 onwards, the Masuda method multiplies this rate by 5, which makes it 5 in 8,192, by 6 in Generation 5, which brings it down to 1 in 1,365 chance of happening, or all the way up to a multiplier of 6, which breaks it down to a 1 in 683 chance from Generation 6 onwards of a shiny Pokemon appearing. Lots of numbers, I get it. Now, the method is named after, but not by, Game Freak co-founder Junichi Masuda, who described the method in his blog in December 2007. The blog post lists various ways that Game Freak decided to incentivize using the GTS in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, describing this bonus as rare-colored Pokemon's egg can be found a little bit easier. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl's GTS was the first time that players could trade internationally over the internet. Thank you, Bulbapedia, because there is no way I was going to figure that one out alone, and it would have taken me more time than just reading your stuff. As a reminder, I learned as much of this as I could just so I could share it with you, and again, learn it myself. Long story short, if two Pokemon are bred that both originate from different languages, any eggs they produce are more likely to be shiny. From Gen 6 onward, the language of origin is marked by an icon on the status screen. Now, it is really unfortunate that the shiny charm doesn't actually help, since that would bring the odds down to a 1 in 512 chance of the Pokemon being born as a shiny Pokemon if it did work. And originally, I was planning to completely skip over the idea of what shiny Pokemon even are, considering I've discussed them in a few other videos, but I feel like it's incredibly relevant here. Shiny Pokemon were originally called rare Pokemon, but thanks to the fans of the game, the nickname of Shiny was coined and made official. You might be familiar with albino animals, and if not, allow me to quote from iowadnr.gov. Goodness. Albinism is the result of cells that can't produce melanin, the pigment needed to color skin, scales, eyes, and hair. This genetic condition gets passed to offspring when both parents carry the recessive gene. When albinism is present, the animal can appear white or pink. An animal can be completely albino, pure albino, or have leucism. Pure albino animals will have pink eyes, nails, skin, and or scales. The pink coloration comes from blood vessels showing through the skin. Animals with leucism may have mostly typical but lighter coloration patterns. Aside from appearance, these animals often have problems related to albinism, such as issues with eyesight. Melanin helps eye development, so without it, irises, retinas, eye muscles, and optic nerves may not form properly. This can cause issues with focusing, depth perception, and tracking in the albino critter. Since melanin helps protect skin from sunlight, lacking the pigment means a higher risk of developing melanoma. This causes trouble for sunbasking species, often leading to death for the albino animal. Birds with albinism have a difficult time finding a mate. While many species attract a potential partner with bright colors, a white bird will often likely get rejected. While a bright white animal may make you stop and stare, what about an all-black variation? This coloration, called melanism, is due to an increase of melanin in the animal's skin and fur. This is a hereditary condition and has been found in various species, including reptiles, amphibians, and mammals. A bright white animal in a green and brown environment really stands out, which may cause the critter to be spotted more easily by predators due to the disruption of cryptic coloration. This is the coloring or markings animals may have in order to blend into their environment. Baby deer have their white spots, an example of this, in order to blend in with these sunspots shining through to the forest floor as they may lay down on the ground and rest. However, there have also been instances of albino animals not being recognized as prey due to their strange coloring. And lastly, some amphibians may have a different color battle where they may be appearing as blue instead of their greenish colors for a number of them. This is the result of genes that should have caused the frog to be green or brown mutating. The mutation causes different wavelengths of light to be filtered out, causing a blue-looking bullfrog. And this all should allow you to understand what struggles every Pokemon may go through within their shiny colorations. This has been shown in a number of different ways in the anime, but I will say one of my favorites is actually seeing the shiny phantump that is seen very much as an outlier from everyone else, but is accepted anyhow. But what if I told you you could influence the personalities of your Pokemon through breeding? Because yes, you can do exactly what every horror story parent would love to do and strongly influence which personality your Pokemon is born with. From Pokemon Black 2, White 2 onward, if one parent holds an Everstone, its nature will always be passed down. If both parents are holding an Everstone, a parent's nature will still always be passed down, but which one of the parents' nature passed down is randomly determined. What even is a nature, you ask? Well, they are what determines your Pokemon's personality, if you just like the flavor of it. But if you want the actual mechanics of it, then it will determine the flavor of food they like most and which combination of stat increases or decreases they will have, or if they will simply have neutral stats. The amount increased or decreased, depending on the nature of the Pokemon, will be by 10%. For example, a hardy nature will have a neutral, non-stat increase or decrease across the board, but a jolly-natured Pokemon will have their total speed stat increased by 10%, their special attack decreased by 10%, and they will like sweet food and hate dry food. This is why natures can be so incredibly vital to a Pokemon. For example, Gengar is my favorite, and that boy is often set up as a speedy glass cannon special attacker. As such, I want a nature that will increase their total speed, but not lower their special attack. So I would choose a nature such as Hasty to increase speed, but lower defense, as I expect my goofy boy to move fast, blast as many Pokemon as possible, and then faint to the lightest breeze if the boy ever does get hit because he couldn't one-shot somebody or somebody was somehow faster than Gengar. I'm not really a competitive player, so I kind of hope that works. It seems to make the most sense, and maybe one day I'll have to just learn competitive or even just have a video on natures so people could understand that whole scene a little bit better. I am people, by the way. I am terrible at actual competitive, but I crave the knowledge. Also want to squeeze in the idea of inheriting independent values, otherwise known as IVs. Let's say the mother has perfect IVs and you want your Pokemon to inherit some of those. Well, the baby will inherit 3 of them each from a different stat and from the parents at random. So you might not even get those perfect IVs that you want. So how do we fix that? If either parent holds a power item, these being the power anklet, band, belt, bracer, lens, or weight, then the baby will receive the IV of the corresponding stat from the parent holding said item, and then inherit 2 other random IVs, each from a random parent. Both parents are able to hold one of these power items, but then it will not inherit both IVs, just one or the other. So to clarify, a parent holding the power anklet means the baby will get the speed IV from that parent. Really nicely if that parent has a perfect speed IV. Then it would get 2 other different IVs from its parents, such as attack and special defense, for a total of 3 IVs inherited. But if one held the power weight and the other one held the power anklet, then the baby will either get the HP stat or the speed stat, but not both. From there, the usual rules apply, and it gets 2 other IVs at random for a total of 3, but they will not get the unchosen stat from the power items. Meaning if the baby is born with the HP stat from the mom, then it will not have the speed stat as the option to inherit anymore. I hope your head isn't spinning, because mine is a little bit, because we still have one more possibility starting in X and Y, because if a parent holds a destiny knot, then the baby will inherit 5 IVs instead of the usual 3, making it so 5 out of the 6 IVs possible, HP, speed, special attack, special defense, and defense, are inherited. And when you combine that with the power item, you can guarantee for sure that one of the desired IVs you want to pass down are inherited by the baby. Unfortunately, nobody is born perfect, meaning that you're gonna be gambling to ensure you get all IVs to be perfect, and this often means that people have to breed 2 nearly perfect Pokemon until you roll the results that you wish for, since the baby will always have one stat which it never inherits from its parents. But once you have a perfect IV Pokemon, that becomes, no, it doesn't become any easier, because it's still not inheriting one stat from the parents, even if they're both perfect IVs. At this point, it feels like you're running a Pokemon baby mill. This is why it's seen as such a chore to breed for perfect IV Pokemon, let alone making sure they are shiny, since when we combine this with everything else, such as what we're about to talk about next, it seems like you could be working literal hours in real life just to get your trophy child that you want to use in a competitive scene. We're all born with a little bit of talent. Sometimes that is inherited from our parents. For example, my inability to shut up has been inherited through the undiagnosed ADHD I likely have thanks to my parents. Though, in all respect, I do love my mother dearly and don't mean any disrespect to her. Biofather took the scenic route for milk. What do you expect me to say? Anywho, joking aside, moves are inherited at birth through a number of different means, though Pokemon are also born with moves at level 1, so how does this work? Well, allow me to make this as easy to follow as possible with the help of Bulbapedia as per usual. Let's use the specific Pokemon as our example to make this easy. I'll use Ghastly as my example, who is born with Hypnosis and Lick in the modern generation regardless of its other parent. But let's say the father is a Dusclops, and that Dusclops had the move Fire Punch. Well, our little Ghastly here will then inherit Fire Punch as a move. Don't ask how it does so without its hands, maybe it just transforms into one giant flaming fist. But that Dusclops, or the mother of the Ghastly, might have even more moves that Ghastly can inherit, such as Ice Punch, Thunder Punch, and Astonish. Well, assuming you have all of those on the Dusclops at the time of breeding, or the female Ghastly does, either way, then Ghastly could be born with all of these moves. But here's the problem. That means Ghastly could be born with a total of 5 moves, even though we can only use 4 or learn 4 for battle. So what now? This means that the game will automatically determine what moves will be inherited based upon how it sets them in the following order. Taking priority would be Volt Tackle, then the mother's egg moves, the father's egg moves, TMs and HMs as a singular unit, inherited level up moves, and then the baby's default moveset, technically being like level 0 moves, I think. And every Pokemon has a massive, just massive list of moves that they can inherit from other Pokemon, and sometimes these moves are only possible to inherit if you do something that can be called chain breeding. Now, let's take the example given by Bulbapedia. You might want an Eevee to have the move Wish, which is not part of its normal moveset, is not a TM, and a Pokemon who knows it naturally, such as Togekiss, is not in the same egg group as Eevee, but through chain breeding, we can reach this goal. We want to maximize our chances, so we ensure that by breeding a female Raichu with a Togekiss, we are able to transfer the moves Charm, Charge, and Wish to the newly born Pichu. We raise the Pichu because baby Pokemon cannot have babies, and with our new Pikachu, it has Wish and Charm, while a Vaporeon we will use for breeding has Charm as well. That was a sin of a sentence to say out loud. Either way, these 2 moves being the only ones that we care about being inherited by their young, as an Eevee is now born with Wish and Charm for its inherited egg moves. But it naturally knows Covet and Helping Hand upon being born amongst many other moves. But thanks to careful breeding and knowing the list of priority for what moves are inherited, as we discussed before this, we made sure it still received Wish and Charm, both being moves that Eevee would not have known naturally through level up. Chain breeding can be a complicated process, but through knowing egg groups and move lists, it becomes a lot easier to understand. Abilities and hidden abilities. I swear this is the last overly technical thing we will discuss, and it'll be over fairly quickly. Since Generation 5 onward, it is possible for the female Pokemon to pass down their ability. This is because the baby will be the same species as the mother, ensuring that, you know, you're not mixing and matching abilities between Pokemon and getting Wonder Guard on a Pokemon such as Electros, who is able to just levitate, not get hit by any move, and effectively make it an unable to be defeated Pokemon unless it were to run out of moves and use Struggle. This is 6 in the morning, so I'm editing this. I'm not going to be on camera, but correction. If it had the ability Wonder Guard, it would not have the ability levitate, so incorrect, but we could terrestrialize it into something that would be more effective and then counter with the ability Wonder Guard, making it still a dangerous Pokemon. That would be a massive issue in competitive scene, in the games, everything. It would be broken. Now, if the female has a hidden ability, then there is a 60% chance that the baby will be born with it, and a 20% chance that the egg will hatch with either of the possible regular abilities. Otherwise, it is an 80% chance that it will hatch with the same ability in the same slots as its mother, as it evolves and levels up and any of those abilities change if that is applicable. The same can essentially be applied to when a male or gender unknown Pokemon is bred with a Ditto, and if the egg does not inherit its ability from a parent, it can only be born with one of its non-hidden abilities, and Ditto's ability does not matter, of course. Alright, we've talked enough about the deeply technical stuff, and I personally have no interest in talking about how Pokeballs are inherited by, you know, breeding, because it just feels like too much to me. And it's time to get into how Pokemon inherit forms. This is technically an extension of regional forms, as we discussed earlier. Forms would also be things such as Burmese Cloak, something that is not dependent on battle. So no, you can't have Palafin that is permanently in its hero form. The form will be inherited by the mother in most cases, or the non-Ditto parent. Burmy will always hatch with the same cloak as its mother, and if bred between Mothim and Ditto, it will always hatch with a plant cloak. This is likely because Burmy is a bagworm, and just like real bagworms, only the males grow wings, and those male bagworms never return to the nest. This means that, of course, the child will inherit the cloak from its mother. because not only does the father not have a cloak anymore, but he's also not there to influence the cloak of their newborn. If you manage to have a Lycanroc Dusk with the ability Own Tempo, being an ability that they do not naturally have, then this Pokemon is treated as its own form, and that can also be inherited. Or Choreo is also able to pass down what form its child is born with, despite them changing their forms based on the nectar that they drink. And there are, of course, exceptions to this. Rotom will always begin or be born in its normal form. Vivillon's pattern depends upon its geographical location in which it was born for its wings. Furfrou will also hatch in its normal form since you're not born stylish with a kill and cut. And Sinistea will always be born in its phony form regardless of its parents. I think you would also break the economy if you were able to breed antiques into existence. They also wouldn't be antiques anymore, would they? I'm not an antiques person unless they bear significant history, so I'm a little bit ignorant on this. Either way, our final section for today is Incense Breeding, because you might ask yourself, why in the world does a smell influence how the child is born? And let's just say pheromones are released by everyone, if not covered up by perfumes and colognes, for a reason. But there's more than just the attraction of mates when it comes to these incense. How does the slew of these incense introduced, starting in Generation 2, change what the outcome is when offspring are born? Well, this is more of a pseudoscience than anything else, since I couldn't find anything that even remotely makes sense scientifically. So, pseudoscience, otherwise known as fake science, it is. And as we use purely Pokemon information and speculate on how this works. By giving Marill or Azumarill a sea incense, the offspring will be an Azurill, otherwise you will result with a Marill. Now, the incense was introduced with Generation 2 alongside baby Pokemon for the first time, so we already understand the technical side of this, but why the sea incense? Well, I couldn't find Azurill in any place that is the sea or ocean besides at Warm Beach, using the Pokewalker of all things, which made me realize I needed to look at the direct translation of the name, which is the Tide Incense, making perfect sense as Azurill likes to live near the edge of water, unlike Marill, who will float about in rivers and fish for their food. Along the same lines, we could give the same general reasoning for the Wave Incense for Mantike to be born, being fairly self-explanatory between Mantike and Mantine, being creatures that are, well, in the waters. They surf on the waves, they fly up into the air. I mean, look at Alola. We move on to Wobbuffet, who when paired with the Lax Incense will result in Wynot being born. Lax Incense also being called the Carefree Incense, and the only tie I can find here is that Wobbuffet will actively ensure that its tail is not seen and not hit, otherwise it will ferociously attack. Meanwhile, Wynot doesn't seem to care at all about its tail just yet, and instead it will just squeeze against other Wynot inside of the caves they live in preparation to build up their endurance to getting hit and counter-attacking. Wynot is also known as the Bright Pokemon, while Wobbuffet is known as the Patient Pokemon. So I suppose Wobbuffet becomes a little more anxious now that it has evolved, now that it's older technically, especially when it is not found in the dark caves in which it prefers and can easier or more easily hide its tail. The Rose or Flower Incense allows for Badoo to be born, and of course any flower releasing its pheromones is essentially saying it's down to I mean, it's their way of saying that they want to be pollinated, and dependent upon the plant letting off the aroma, it will hope to have created the right smell to attract the creatures that it prefers to be pollinated by. What could the Pokemon that pollinate Roselia be? Well, those would be the Pokemon that were first introduced in the same generation and route in which they were, Volbeat and Illumis, who, again, you can find on the same route every single time. If you want more information on that, I recommend checking out my Ecology of Hoenn video as part of my regional ecology series. Just be a little prepared, as there are some things that I have learned since then and I've corrected in more recent videos, but most of it's fairly correct, and you know, some of these corrections are completed thanks to viewers such as you, because I don't know everything, and I feel like I should say thank you for, you know, saying viewers like you, thanks to PBS drilling that phrase into my head, but seriously, thank you for watching this far, we're almost done. The pure incense that you need to get a Chingling from a Chimecho makes a lot more sense now, considering we understand the Phione and the significance it has and the purifying sound that it does release in order to ward off evil spirits as the real-life wind chime. So instead we move on to the rock incense. Rock. It's literally rock incense in its direct translation as well. And while you may think that's really, really dumb, like who would ever smell a rock, there are actually a few rocks that you can immediately tell what type of rock they are just by smelling them, just like the stink rock, for example, which stinks. Wow, who would have guessed? But without getting too deep into it, to identify rocks, there's luster, cleavage, smell, how they react with acid, such as if they effervesce or not. Basically, do they release gas when you put a little bit of acid on them, the inclusions that they might have, how dark or light they are, and a few other details that will help us identify them. This also made me deeply miss my geology classes, as I was going to minor in geology before I dropped out. Oops. But back to rock incense, it is used to get Bonsly from Sudowoodo, our Pokemon that represents petrified wood. And take what I'm about to say with a pretty big grain of salt, as I have a weak sense of smell and I can't confirm this. Despite having come into contact with petrified wood before, I've never noticed if they have a distinct smell, but according to some people, there can be a special smell associated with petrified wood dependent upon what minerals replaced the wood itself. If there are any geologists out there, please do inform me, because I cannot just trust the internet on this one, and I do not wish to mislead others. The odd or mysterious incense allows for a Mime Jr. to be born, and look, there might not be an actual explanation, proper one, for this. The reason I say this is because this whole line of Pokemon is a little bit of a paradox. You see, Mime Jr. likes to mimic Mr. Mime and Mr. Rhyme as it looks up to them, which then results in them eventually evolving into Mime or Rhyme. But here's the problem. How did those Pokemon come into existence if you need a Mime Jr. to exist, or rather their evolutions to exist first? The only viable explanation is that Mime Jr. had to mimic humans over the years, and I would be willing to bet that our Mime may have had a different form long ago before eventually taking a more humanoid shape in order to mimic human mimes and tap dancers through time. Originally, I would have said that maybe they taught humans these performance skills, but I couldn't find a rumor to confirm this. Meanwhile, a Pokemon such as Conkeldurr is said to have taught humans how to make concrete. Our last two, as in order to get a Happiny, you need to use a good luck incense. And this is another that is incredibly easy to pinpoint, as Chansey's name, Chance, implies luck, and its Japanese name is literally lucky. So you're really just setting the mood with the incense that is named after them. And the final incense is the full incense, which allows a Munchlax to be born from a breeding Snorlax. This makes the holder bloated and slow moving, which just seems like one big joke, because the only way that Snorlax may ever breed is when they are full and no longer hunting for the limitless supply of food that they want to shove down their gullets. Which, now that I think about it more, this actually could also relate to the idea that animals will only mate for offspring if there are enough resources to support them. And let me tell you, any location that can support a Snorlax is incredibly rare, so you're gonna have to induce breeding somehow. But after all that, you should now know everything that you need to know about breeding Pokemon. This was way more intricate, interesting, and fun than I initially expected it to be, but as I continued through the research, I started understanding it more, and it started becoming more fun as I could relate it to real life stuff, as always. And if you made it this far and you've enjoyed it, please do make sure that you do subscribe. Again, leave a comment about shiny Pokemon, about, your first one, or just leave some fun animal facts, or support or argue against any points that I've made. Again, I can only learn and grow better with your support. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, you can always become a member for as little as $3 a month, which you get a number of different perks. One of those perks being the members shout out that you get at the end of every single video, which we're gonna go do right now. Thank you to all of our members of the channel, starting with the Gods of Hope, Co-Final Fantasy 14, Biggins, Vanny, Nib, Buzz, and Summer, and then our champions, Andrew Murch, Nias Costa, and Joshua Biggins Wilson. Finally, not even finally, oh my gosh. Starting with all of our Gods of Hope, crew, Final Fantasy 14, Biggins, Vanny, Nit, Buzz, and Summer, Andrew Murch, and, oh, fuck me, sideways. Starting with all of our gods of hope, we have Quill, Final Fantasy 14, Biggins, Vatty, Nit, Buzz, and Summer, our champions. Andrew Merchant, Costa, and Joshua Biggins Wilson. Then our Knights of the Court, Pander, Luke Sasti, Grumbo, Moth Romance, Double, Shiny Gem, Sarah Biz Boys, Vatty Lemon, Fix My Natural, Quill, Final Fantasy 14, Plow, Annie, Stone, Allen, Heals for Life, Blue, Dalek, and Warren Hemphill. And then finally, all of our Wanderers, Star S, Vanny Samaru, Max Supreme, Surfer, Sin, Zanzibar, Explorer Cheese, Shy, Flariana, 16, Midna Azalea, Pyromaster, J. Gill, Reckless, Cincinnati, Prime 90s, Nebula Games, Jenna M, None of Your Business, We, Ezra, Rowan, 480, Brock Baker, Zivet Pigeon, 80, Abby Hicks, Adrian C.S., Amanda Masticola, 3 Ronin Space Lazzies, Sadler Rankin, Abdallah Aladi, Tamarco, Gaming Runes, Big Break, Macebreaker, Rainbow, Hungry Goat, Malachi Zamakai, Saffron Queen, Clark GA, Mr. Diagonal Yibs, Night Owl 707, Evil Chan, Ruby, Sofian Kai, Micah 626 Gaming, Nicole Manasium, Kristen, The Sandwich, Boss Emmy, whatever this is, The Sporty Yamper, Michael Stein, Alolan Figment, Lost Mysteria, Manico TA73, Swergalicious, Sydney House, Miss Zora, Dakota Couch, Brad Sundimer, Drixel, Carl Jean, Hunter Al, Hussein Kasab, Rebecca Connell, Hune, Jappy, W, Memento, Mortal Corn, Marshy, Edward Kosowski, Benica Fox, Notor, Spreeberg, Hag, Eddie Cadabra, King Pie, Jack of Frost, Rushes, Snivy, ADC, Jacob Square, DJ Monk 23, Squidwater, Rice Smith, Gamer, Bad Dragon Knight, Just J, M, MD, Horse with Cocktail, Muse, Artworld, Olivia, Gwendolyn, Eastgander 072, Andrew Frost, Peak Anonymous, Summons, Law, Knock You, and Ian Ray, Big and C Knight, Corner of the Cobb, Michael Vale, Unseelie King, The Orient Skies, Daniel Tracy, Garrett Hoffman, Dylan Peters, Malachi Burkhardt, and Heather Weiss. And thank you all for being members of the channel, whether it be on YouTube or the Patreon. If you want to hear your name at the end of every single video in these credits, then become a member for as little as $3 a month to become a Wanderer. Otherwise, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I want to do. Don't think I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time.